Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Kevin Burke. My pronouns are he, him, and I work as the Metadata Analyst at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Today, I'm going to provide a brief overview of a project we ran recently to create a local authority file in Alma for the Government of Canada core subject Thesaurus. I'll begin with a brief background on the GCCST and its use in our collections. Then I'll walk through the process of converting the records to a suitable format for our use, and some of the challenges we encountered working with the Thesaurus in Alma, as well as the solutions we found. Finally, I'll talk a bit about the ongoing maintenance of the local authority and any considerations for future work or improvements. The GCCST, or Government of Canada Core Subject Thesaurus, is a controlled vocabulary intended for use by Canadian federal institutions. Its scope is broad, intended to cover all areas relevant to government information with limited specialization. The vocabulary is available in both English and French, in mirrored versions. Each version has 2,307 preferred terms, and each preferred term has a single exact match in the opposite language. The vocabulary is maintained by Library and Archives Canada and is updated on a regular basis. So how did this project come about at Carleton? We were working on a project to review the use of local subject fields, 690s, as part of ongoing record cleanup, figure out what fields we were using for what purpose, and make recommendations about local fields to maintain or whether headings would be better off in a global field instead. We found about 47,000 records with about 108,000 GCCST headings in the local field 692. We're still not entirely sure where these terms came from, but we suspect they are from older versions of the Government of Canada's Weekly Acquisitions List, a distribution service for government publications. With so many headings and records of local significance, we wanted to preserve existing subject access and control the headings to ensure continued accuracy and ongoing maintenance. Without authorities available for GCCST in Alma's community zone, we realized we would need to create a local authority file instead. The first step was collecting records to load into Alma. The GCCST is available for download in French and English from Library and Archives Canada in several formats: SCOS RDF, XML, and CSV. These files are publicly available and, as I mentioned earlier, updated regularly. Unfortunately, none of these formats is viable for the creation of a local authority in Alma, which has strict requirements on the format of records to be loaded. In order to load the authorities and make them available for linking to our bibliographic records, we would first need to develop an approach to convert them into a format that worked with our system. In order to enable the loading of the authorities in Alma, we decided to work with the records in SCOS RDF with the goal of converting them to MARC XML. The SCOS RDF records have a similar structure to MARC and are already encoded in XML, which is relatively easy to work with. We were able to use an existing workflow from Summers et al. For the conversion of records from MARC to SCOS as a template to design a process going in the opposite direction using XSLT, Extensible Stylesheet Language Transformations. This approach made the conversion of the records very fast and enabled us to maintain the data from the SCOS records that we had identified as being necessary in our MARC versions. One of the issues we encountered was that, while the records are available for download, the URIs included are constructed with the preferred term. We knew that we would need some form of identifier that would remain stable across changes in preferred terms for long-term stability. Staff at Library and Archives Canada were kind enough to provide custom files for the authorities that included both their internal term numbers and GUIDs, Global Unique Identifiers, for each record. Here is the basic structure of the crosswalk we developed. As with any crosswalk, there are areas where the relationship between source format and target format are not exact. One area we struggled with, the member of attribute, refers to an overarching subject area that a term belongs to. The field is repeatable, and the subject areas are not themselves terms in the vocabulary, which limits our options for mark fields to use in order to preserve this data. We landed on using 072, the subject category code, which isn't a perfect fit, but allows us to maintain the information without creating structural issues in our records. Much of the rest of the record is a fairly straightforward conversion. The SCOS attribute preferred label becomes our 150 label, a topical term. The alternate labels become 450s, see from references, and the scope note lands in 680, the public general note. You will also note that there are several SCOS attributes that are converted to the mark field 550, a see also reference. Without specific mark field tags for broader and narrower terms, we relied on the content of subfield W to specify the nature of the relationship between related terms. You may also have noticed that we used the 750 field to link between English and French versions of the same term, with source codes that include a language code. I'll explain a little more about that later. In addition to the data from the SCOS records, we had to include some fields with default values in our mark records, including the leader, 008, and 040. Some of these fields differ between English and French records, which require different approaches. We wanted to ensure the language of the record was properly represented in the 040 field, as were the source and the transcribing institution. We also included a non-public note with the date of the conversion for our own tracking purposes. There are also some data that are generated by the system, such as the length of the record and base address of data in the leader, so we left these portions blank to be generated by Alma after import. With the crosswalk constructed, we converted the records in two sets, working with French and English separately. I used XSLT-proc, a tool for applying XSLT to documents directly within the command line, which saved the work of linking XML and XSLT documents in the document's headers. After producing the mark XML records, I did some cleanup. The content of the SCOS records is %encoded, as with URLs where special characters such as white spaces and diacritics are replaced with codes that start with % symbols, and needed to be decoded before loading into Alma. This was done using Python and the URLlib module. The decoding process broke some special characters, which then needed to be corrected manually. After the cleanup, the records were ready to be loaded into Alma. While we had originally hoped to keep the French and English terms in a single vocabulary with a single source code, the presence of homonyms between languages complicated the matter. There are also some instances where a preferred term in one language appears as an alternate label in the other. It quickly became apparent that maintaining a single vocabulary wasn't going to be practical, even relying on Alma's multilingual authorities functionality, which allows multiple 1xx fields differentiated by language data in a subfield 9. Because of the potential for the incorrect redirection of headings between languages, we ended up creating two local vocabularies, GCCST/EN and GCCST/FR. The language codes are shortened from the typical 3 characters due to the limitations of Alma, which caps vocabulary source codes at 8 characters long. The import profiles for authorities are overall simpler than those for bibliographic records. Many of the same options exist, but the options are reduced for match method, and match actions are limited to default settings. There's also no inventory actions associated with authority records, which further simplifies the process. We also used Alma's normalization jobs to update the 008 at position 29, ensuring that records accurately reflected the presence or absence of the 450 and 550 tracing fields, and created a job to add a local note to all the records imported, which forced the update of system-generated data. Since our bibliographic records had the GCCST terms in a local field which can't be linked to authority files, and our source codes didn't include language codes, we had to update our bibliographic records as well to ensure correct matching of terms. Using a Python script, I added language codes to the subfield 2 based on the presence of the heading in either the French or English vocabulary. If a term was present as a preferred term in both languages, as some are, I defaulted to the language of the record, meaning that English records had English headings and French records had French headings. There was, of course, some manual cleanup involved for terms with typos, incorrect terms, etc. After reloading the bibliographic data, all headings were successfully linked to the local authorities. With the success of this project, we have also taken on some additional maintenance work moving forward. As the vocabulary is updated, we will need to expand the current workflow to account for updates to preferred terms, ensuring that previous headings are properly encoded in our local records. In addition, as mentioned earlier, the files available for public download don't currently include the term numbers, which are necessary for matching across changes in preferred terms. Library and Archives Canada have accepted a suggestion to include these numbers in future updates to the vocabulary, so this challenge may soon be resolved. It is possible that some of the challenges we encountered could be rendered obsolete with Alma's built-in multilingual functionality, or that future updates to Alma could simplify the process. That being said, in their current state, Alma's features don't seem to provide practical, in-system answers to a lot of the challenges involved in working with a local bilingual authority file. With that, I'd like to give a special thanks to Andrew Dutton, the editor of the GCCST, and his colleagues at Library and Archives Canada for their support throughout this process, including providing custom exports of the authority files for us to work with. I've also included links here to some of the resources I relied on in this work, and to Carleton's University Library's GitHub repository, where we've housed the XSLT and Python script used in this process. Since I'll be leaving Carleton soon to take a position at another library, I've included my personal email on this slide as well. I'm happy to connect and answer any questions about this process. Thank you.